Have you ever wondered what happens when a quiet life collides with chaos? Picture this. The piercing wail of sirens slices through the stillness of a dusty ranch, red and blue lights dancing across sprawling fields as two sheriff's cruisers grind up a gravel driveway. Meet Tom Grayson, a weathered rancher with calloused hands, a faded Stetson hat, and a loyal sheepdog named Shadow, whose slow tail wag hints at unease. Standing by his fence, Tom faces off against Lila Harper, the newly crowned president of the Willow Creek HOA, her shrill voice dripping with smug authority. What begins as a petty dispute over cows and fences is about to spiral into a tale of courage, community, and unexpected redemption, a story that will tug at your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. The tension crackles as Lila accuses Tom of violating HOA rules, her phone held high like a weapon, claiming his cattle trespassed near her prized gardenia bush. But Tom, with a raised eyebrow and a steady voice, challenges her to check her facts, his land, his rules. Then, a cow's unexpected moo shatters the silence, hinting at a twist no one sees coming. 6 months ago, Tom's peaceful existence as a fifth-generation rancher was disrupted when the Willow Creek subdivision sprouted luxury homes on what used to be grazing land. Lila, with her manicured lawn and loud opinions, moved in, determined to impose order on Tom's rugged world. Now, picture yourself in Tom's boots. The dust clings to your skin, the weight of tradition on your shoulders, as Lila's accusations threaten your way of life. What would you do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Would you stand your ground with quiet defiance or confront Lila head-on, risking escalation? And while you're there, please subscribe to the Daily Narrated Stories channel. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support will help us share more inspiring tales like this one. Tom Grayson had always lived by the rhythm of the land. Sunrise to sunset, the creak of the barn door, the lowing of his cattle like a heartbeat in the distance. But lately, that rhythm had been shattered. One crisp morning, as the dew still clung to the grass, Tom walked his pasture with Shadow at his heels, the sheepdog's ears pricked for any sign of trouble. That's when he saw it. A scattering of trash, crumpled candy wrappers, plastic bags glinting in the sunlight, and, most chillingly, a bottle of weed killer, its cap loose, contents seeping into the earth. His stomach churned, a cold fear gripping him. This wasn't an accident. Someone was targeting his land, his livelihood, the legacy his family had built since 1912. Tom knelt, the dirt gritty under his knees, and picked up the bottle, its chemical stench stinging his nose. His mind raced. Could it be kids playing a prank? No, the intent felt sharper, more malicious. He thought of his cattle, grazing just beyond the rise, oblivious to the danger. If they ingested this poison, he'd lose them, and with them, the last tether to his grandfather's dream. A memory flashed. His grandfather, weathered hands guiding a young Tom through the pasture, saying, "If your boots are dirty and your heart's clean, you're golden, son." That lesson had carried Tom through droughts, storms, and lean years, but now it felt like a fragile shield against a faceless enemy. Determined to protect his ranch, Tom drove into town that afternoon, the bottle wrapped in a rag on the passenger seat. At the hardware store, he bought a set of security cameras, their boxes rattling in the bed of his truck as he headed home. Installing them felt like a betrayal of the open trust he'd always lived by, but he had no choice. That night, under a moonless sky, he reviewed the footage, the grainy black and white images flickering on his old monitor. His breath caught as the timestamp hit 11:47 p.m. There, climbing halfway over his fence, was Lila Harper, her face illuminated by the faint glow of a street lamp from the subdivision. She carried a bag, dumping its contents onto his land with a deliberate, almost furious motion. Tom's fists clenched, his nails biting into his palms. The betrayal stung deeper than the weed killer ever could. He leaned back in his creaky wooden chair, the barn's familiar scent of hay and aged wood doing little to calm the storm in his chest. Confront her now, and he risked an all-out war. Lila's temper was as predictable as a summer storm, fierce and unrelenting. But waiting, giving her a chance to explain, felt like clinging to a thread of hope he wasn't sure he believed in. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Never swing first, only defend. Tom exhaled, deciding to hold off. Maybe Lila was stressed. Her life a tangle of unmet expectations. Maybe there was still a chance for understanding. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The morning the sheriffs arrived, the air was thick with tension, the kind that settles in your bones before a storm breaks. Tom stood by his fence, Shadow at his side, the dog's tail still but his eyes alert. The gravel crunched under the weight of two sheriff's cruisers, their sirens now silent, but their lights still flashing, casting eerie shadows across the fields. Lila marched behind them, her designer sunglasses perched on her nose, her voice a shrill blade cutting through the morning stillness. "That's him. He's breaking every HOA rule in the book," she declared, pointing at Tom as if he were a criminal caught red-handed. Sheriff Daniels, a gruff man with a salt and pepper beard, stepped out, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Mr. Grayson, we got a call about a disturbance. Livestock too close to the neighborhood, possible ordinance violations, trespassing reports." Before Tom could respond, Lila interrupted, her phone held high like a badge of authority. "I've got video evidence. His cows were 10 feet from my gardenia bush, a clear threat. I want him cited or arrested." Her words dripped with smug certainty, but Tom's heart pounded with a mix of anger and resolve. He tried to be patient, to believe in kindness, but this was too far. He took a slow breath, the scent of dust and grass grounding him, and met the sheriff's gaze. "Sheriff, you might want to check her facts. If you're about to arrest me on my own land, we're going to have a real interesting day." His voice was steady, but inside, he felt the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him. This ranch wasn't just land. It was his father's laughter as they branded cattle together, his grandfather's weathered hands building the barn, his own quiet mornings watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee. Lila's accusations weren't just an attack on him. They were an attack on everything he held dear. Tom's mind flashed to the footage he'd seen the night before, Lila's deliberate trespassing, her calculated malice. Should he reveal it now, risk escalating the situation, or wait for the right moment? He glanced at Shadow, the dog's trusting eyes grounding him. Kindness had always been his compass, but kindness has its limits, and Lila had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The sheriff exchanged a look with Deputy Carter, a younger officer with a softer demeanor, and Tom could tell they sensed something wasn't adding up. The question hung in the air, unanswered. What would Lila's overreach cost her? Sheriff Daniels bent down, his boots kicking up a small cloud of dust as he inspected the ground near the fence line. Lila kept talking, her voice growing louder, more frantic, as she ranted about property values, livestock diseases, and HOA bylaws. "This is a safety issue. We can't have cows wandering near our homes," she insisted, her arms crossed tightly, as if holding herself together. But Daniels wasn't listening to her words. His eyes narrowed at something in the dirt, and he stood slowly, brushing off his hands. "Lila," he said, his tone calm but firm, "this is cow manure, and it's on Tom's land. Your property line ends 10 feet back." Lila blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The smug certainty that had defined her every move began to crack, her designer sunglasses slipping down her nose to reveal darting, uncertain eyes. But the cows were near our land," she stammered, her voice losing its edge. Deputy Carter, standing a few feet away with his hands on his hips, chimed in, his voice gentle but pointed. "Being near isn't a crime, ma'am." The words landed like a quiet rebuke, and for the first time, Lila's confidence seemed to waver, her shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of her own miscalculation. Tom watched her unravel, a strange mix of satisfaction and pity stirring in his chest. He'd seen her type before, people who thrived on control, who mistook rules for righteousness. But beneath her polished exterior, he sensed a deeper insecurity, a need to prove herself in a world she couldn't quite tame. Part of him wanted to reach out, to ask what drove her to such lengths, but the memory of that weed killer bottle burned too brightly in his mind. Shadow wagged his tail, oblivious to the tension, and Tom scratched behind the dog's ears, grounding himself in the familiar warmth of his companion. Lila's voice sharpened again, grasping at straws. "Then what about the fence? It's crooked, and that dog, it came too close to me." She pointed at Shadow, who tilted his head in confusion, his tongue lolling out. Tom almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Shadow, who hadn't chased anything faster than a butterfly in years, a threat? But he held his composure, his gaze steady. "Sheriff," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I've got cameras installed. Footage going back a month." Lila froze, her arms dropping to her sides, her sunglasses sliding further down her nose. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. What secrets might those tapes reveal? The group moved toward the barn, the air heavy with unspoken questions. Tom led the way, his boots crunching on the gravel, Shadow trotting behind him with a soft whine. Lila followed, her jaw tight, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles whitened. Sheriff Daniels and Deputy Carter flanked them, their eyes scanning the surroundings, alert for any sign of trouble. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered wood a testament to decades of storms and stories, a silent guardian of the Grayson legacy. But just as they reached the door, a cow let out an eerie, guttural moo, the same sound that had made Lila's friend scream earlier. Tom's pulse quickened, a primal instinct kicking in. Something wasn't right. Before anyone could react, a loud splintering crash echoed from behind the hay bales stacked high against the barn's far side. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping, and it sent a jolt through everyone. Sheriff Daniels drew his weapon in one fluid motion, his voice a low growl. "Stay back." Lila gasped, her hands flying to her chest, while Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent, before bolting around the side of the barn. Deputy Carter followed, his own hand hovering near his holster, his eyes wide with alertness. The air shifted, the kind of shift you feel in your bones before a storm hits. Tom's heart pounded, his mind racing with possibilities. Was this a prank, a thief hiding in the shadows, or something far darker? The unanswered question hung heavy, thickening the tension as Daniels moved cautiously toward the source of the noise, his boots crunching over the gravel. Lila hesitated, torn between following and fleeing, her earlier bravado replaced by a raw, palpable fear. Tom didn't run. He walked, calm but steady, past the hay bales stacked to the rafters. He'd been on this land all his life. There wasn't a square inch he didn't know like the back of his hand. But even he wasn't prepared for what he'd find next. Behind the barn, tangled in a mess of torn tarp and splintered fence, lay a teenage boy Tom didn't recognize. The boy's jeans were caked with mud, his sneakers worn thin at the soles, and a deep scratch on his arm oozed blood, staining the tarp beneath him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, like a deer caught in headlights. He looked up, startled, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, as if he'd been running for his life and failed. "What in the world?" Tom muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, his heart sinking at the sight. Sheriff Daniels lowered his gun, realizing this wasn't the threat he'd feared. "You okay, son?" he asked, his tone softer now, paternal. The boy, Ethan, blinked rapidly, his voice trembling as he stammered. I wasn't stealing nothing, I swear. I was just trying to find a place to sleep, that's all." His words were laced with desperation, each one a plea for mercy. Lila, who had finally caught up and peeked around the barn wall, let out a piercing shriek. "That's who was back here? A vagrant. I knew it, probably hopped off a train or something. He could be dangerous." Her voice was shrill, but there was a tremor in it now, a crack in her armor. Tom ignored her, his focus entirely on the boy. He took a step forward, his boots scuffing the dirt, and crouched down to Ethan's level. The boy flinched, his body tensing as if expecting a blow, but Tom's voice was gentle, steady. "What's your name, son?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting between Tom, the sheriff, and Lila, as if calculating his odds of escape. Finally, he mumbled, Ethan Brooks." The name hung in the air, fragile and heavy, a thread connecting this scared boy to a story Tom didn't yet understand. But he could feel the weight of Ethan's fear, the raw vulnerability in his trembling hands, and it stirred something deep within him, a protective instinct he hadn't felt since his own son left for college years ago. Tom studied Ethan for a long moment, taking in the boy's hollow cheeks, the dirt smudged across his forehead, the way his hands shook as he clutched the tarp. He couldn't have been more than 16, maybe younger, his frame small and wiry, like he'd been running on fumes for too long. "You hungry, Ethan?" Tom asked, his voice soft but firm, cutting through the tension like a warm breeze. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the question, his eyes searching Tom's face for any hint of a trick. "What?" he whispered, as if he hadn't heard right. "You hungry?" Tom repeated, his tone unwavering. Ethan hesitated, then nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Yeah, I ain't eaten since yesterday morning." His voice was barely audible, but the admission carried a weight that hit Tom like a punch to the gut. Lila scoffed, her arms crossing tighter, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're seriously feeding him? He's trespassing. He could have diseases." Her words were sharp, but they lacked the conviction she'd had earlier. She was grasping at straws, trying to regain control of a situation slipping through her fingers. Sheriff Daniels held up a hand to quiet her, his expression unreadable. "Tom, you want to press charges?" he asked, his voice neutral but his eyes searching. Tom looked at Ethan again, the boy's scared, dirty face, the way his shoulders hunched as if expecting the worst. He thought of his own childhood, of the times he'd felt lost, alone, and how his grandfather's kindness had pulled him through. "No," Tom said simply, his voice firm. "I want to get him cleaned up and fed." Lila gasped so hard she nearly choked, her face twisting in disbelief. "You can't be serious. What if he tries to rob you in your sleep?" "He ain't a threat," Tom said quietly, his gaze never leaving Ethan. "He's just a kid." Ethan's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear. For the first time, he seemed to relax, just a fraction, his shoulders loosening as if a weight had been lifted. Tom stood, offering a hand to help Ethan up, and the boy took it, his grip weak but trusting. The simple act felt like a promise of safety, of care, of a chance to be seen as more than a problem to be solved. Deputy Carter took a slow breath, his eyes softening as he looked at Ethan. "We'll need to call child services, make sure he's safe," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Ethan's face went pale, his body tensing again, and he shook his head frantically. "Please, no, don't send me back. I'll run again. I swear I will." His voice cracked, the words spilling out in a rush of panic. "Foster care, they don't treat us good there. I was better on the streets." The raw pain in his voice cut through the air, a haunting echo of a life marked by neglect and betrayal. Tom's heart clenched, a memory of his own flashing unbidden. His cousin, years ago, lost to a broken system, her letters full of despair until they stopped coming altogether. He knelt beside Ethan again, his voice low and steady. "Back from where, son?" Ethan bit his lip, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Foster care," he whispered. They don't care. They shove food at you, lock you in a room, and forget you exist. I've been in homes where I'd rather sleep on the street than stay another night." His voice broke on the last word, and he looked away, ashamed of his own vulnerability. Lila, who had been silent for a moment, exploded again, her voice a mix of outrage and disbelief. "This is turning into a circus. My HOA doesn't allow livestock to wander, and it sure doesn't allow runaway vagrants camping next door. This is a crime scene." But her words fell flat, ignored by everyone around her. Tom's focus was on Ethan, on the boy's trembling hands and haunted eyes. He offered his hand again, this time with a quiet resolve. "Come on," he said. "Shadow will show you where the kitchen is. Got some stew left from lunch." Ethan looked at the hand for a long moment, then took it, his grip stronger this time, as if clinging to a lifeline. He followed Tom slowly, Shadow trotting along beside them, his tail wagging as if welcoming a new member of the family. Lila stood frozen in place, her jaw locked, arms trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. She looked at Sheriff Daniels, her voice rising again. "Well, aren't you going to do something?" Daniels sighed, his patience wearing thin. "We'll make a report, ma'am, but this is private land, and last I checked, Mr. Grayson hasn't broken any laws." Lila's face turned red, her control slipping further with every passing second. Inside the ranch house kitchen, Tom set a steaming bowl of stew in front of Ethan, the rich aroma of beef and thyme filling the air. The boy stared at it like it was made of gold, his hands hovering over the bowl as if afraid it might disappear. "You don't got to do this," Ethan said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I know," Tom replied, leaning back in his chair, watching the boy with a quiet intensity. "But someone's got to show you not everyone out there's out to hurt you." Ethan took the first bite, his eyes closing as the warmth spread through him, a soft sigh escaping his lips. It was the first real meal he'd had in weeks, and the gratitude in his expression was almost tangible. Tom watched him eat, the clink of the spoon against the bowl a soft counterpoint to the storm brewing outside. "You been out there long?" he asked, his voice gentle but curious. Ethan nodded between bites, his shoulders relaxing with each mouthful. "Almost a year," he said. "Bounced around homes before that. None of them wanted me after I turned 15. His voice was matter of fact, but the pain beneath it was raw, a wound that hadn't healed. Tom leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his mind drifting to his own youth. Times when he'd felt unwanted, unworthy, until his grandfather's steady presence had shown him otherwise. Outside, Lila was pacing near the fence line, barking into her phone, her voice a sharp contrast to the quiet warmth of the kitchen. "She's going to keep coming, isn't she?" Ethan asked, his eyes flicking to the window. "Yep," Tom said, his tone calm but resolute. Ethan's gaze lingered on Lila, then shifted to Shadow, who had laid his head in the boy's lap. Ethan flinched at first, then slowly scratched behind the dog's ears, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're not scared I'll steal or wreck something?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Tom shook his head. "You had a dozen chances to run when you saw the sheriff. You didn't. That tells me something." Just then, the back door creaked open, and Sheriff Daniels stepped in, his face tight with concern. "I need a word, Tom." They stepped outside, leaving Ethan with Shadow, the boy's fingers still buried in the dog's fur. Daniel's voice was low, urgent. "She's filing an official complaint. Wants zoning laws checked, safety inspections, an emergency HOA vote to put pressure on you through county channels." Tom didn't look surprised, but his jaw tightened. "She's serious this time," Daniels warned. "And she's got friends in high places, money, connections." Tom's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the fields. "Money don't change what's right," he said. But deep inside, he knew this was going to get worse before it got better. The next few days were a blur of activity. Tom and Ethan worked side by side, their hammers echoing through the crisp morning air as they reinforced the barn's rafters. Ethan, unsure at first, grew more confident with each nail he drove, his hands steadier, his posture straighter. Tom watched him with a quiet pride, remembering the first time his own grandfather had handed him a hammer, the weight of responsibility settling on his young shoulders. "Sometimes the small things keep big things standing," Tom said one afternoon, clapping Ethan on the back after the boy wedged a board in place during a gusty wind. Ethan cracked a small smile, the first real one Tom had seen. "Wasn't much," he mumbled, but he stood a little taller, the hammer in his hand feeling less foreign. But the peace didn't last. One morning, as Ethan tightened bolts in the loft, a sleek black SUV rolled up the dirt road, its polished exterior a stark contrast to the dusty ranch. Ethan froze, his heart pounding as he peered out the loft window. Lila stood beside the SUV, her posture triumphant, as if she'd summoned it from her front yard. Next to her was a woman in a gray pantsuit, her heels sinking into the gravel, a thick folder in her hands. Lila pointed straight at the barn, her gesture cold, calculated. Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew that look, had seen it too many times in foster homes where rules trumped humanity. Panic snapped through him, a primal urge to run, to disappear into the vastness of the fields. He climbed down from the loft, his movements jerky, and grabbed his backpack from the workbench, the worn straps digging into his shoulder. He bolted for the fence line, his sneakers slipping on the loose dirt, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Shadow barked loudly, the sound sharp and urgent, alerting Tom, who emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a rag. "Ethan," Tom called, his voice a mix of concern and confusion. The woman in the pantsuit, Agent Nora Klein, turned, her eyes locking on Ethan with a predator's focus. She said something to Lila, then started walking fast in Ethan's direction, her heels clicking ominously on the gravel. Ethan's heart raced. He couldn't go back, not to the system, not to the nightmares he'd escaped. Ethan sprinted past the stables, his lungs burning, the taste of dust coating his tongue. He aimed for the far pasture, where the tree line could swallow him whole if he made it there. But Klein was faster than she looked, her movements precise, deliberate. She reached the fence, pulling out a badge that gleamed in the sunlight. her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Ethan Brooks, under state order, you are to be taken back into foster care custody immediately." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow, his legs faltering, his body stumbling to a stop. He turned, fists clenched, torn between running and facing the inevitable. Tom walked toward the fence, his eyes narrowed, his boots steady on the uneven ground. "You want to explain why you're showing up on my land without so much as a phone call?" he demanded, his voice low but laced with steel. Lila stepped forward, her smugness restored. "He's a runaway, and he's underage. Keeping him here is illegal. That's harboring a minor. I told you, Sheriff, this man is dangerous." Klein didn't take her eyes off Tom, her expression cold, calculating. "I'm Agent Nora Klein, Child Protective Services. According to my report, Ethan Brooks has been missing for over 6 months. If he's been here the whole time." "He hasn't," Tom cut in, his voice sharp. "He showed up just days ago, and he ain't been hurt. He's safe. You're welcome to talk to him, but you're not taking him without a court order." His words were a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. Lila gaped, her face twisting with indignation. "He just admitted to breaking the law." "No," Tom said calmly, his gaze unwavering. "I admitted to being kind." Ethan, standing at the edge of the pasture, watched the exchange, his breath still ragged, his fists still clenched. Something in Tom's defiance sparked a flicker of courage in him. He turned around and started walking back toward the barn, straight toward the people trying to take him. Tom's chest tightened as Ethan approached, the boy's steps slow but deliberate. "You don't have to," Tom said, but Ethan shook his head, his voice quiet but steady. "It's okay, Tom." He stopped in front of Klein, his eyes meeting hers with a resolve that belied his age. "If I go back, I want to be placed somewhere that doesn't feel like a prison. Somewhere with people who don't just shove food at me and lock me in a room." Klein looked surprised, her composed facade cracking for a moment. "That's not typical foster care policy," she said, her tone clipped. Ethan's voice hardened. "I know what typical is. I lived it. So if I got to go back, it better be different this time." His words hung in the air, a quiet demand for dignity, for a chance at something better. Klein nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "We can talk, but you need to come with me, just for now." Ethan looked back at Tom, his eyes searching for reassurance. Tom gave the smallest nod, a silent promise that he wouldn't let Ethan disappear into the system without a fight. Ethan climbed into the SUV, the door shutting with a heavy thud, and as the vehicle pulled away, Tom's gut twisted with unease. Klein's cold, calculating stare lingered in the rearview mirror, her eyes fixed on Ethan like he was a box to be checked off a list. Something wasn't right. Tom could feel it, a gnawing dread that refused to let go. That night, the barn was quiet, the hammering silenced, the laughter between Ethan and Shadow gone. Tom sat on the porch, a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands, staring out across the pasture. The stars above were dim, hidden by a thin veil of clouds, and the silence felt oppressive, heavy with the absence of Ethan's tentative smiles. He should have felt proud. He'd helped the boy, protected him, given him food, work, and dignity, but all he felt was the silence, the uncertainty, the fear that he'd failed to keep Ethan safe. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the stillness. Tom picked it up, expecting the sheriff, but the voice on the other end was Paul, the neighbor from Lot 12. "Tom, you might want to come out front. There's, something happening." Tom stood, his boots scuffing the porch boards, and walked out to the fence line. He stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. A crowd had gathered, not angry, not yelling, just neighbors from the subdivision. Paul, Susan, a few others. They carried toolboxes, paint cans, and planks of wood, their faces lit with determination. "Heard you got 2 weeks to fix that barn," Paul said, a smile tugging at his lips. Susan held up a drill, her eyes warm. "Figured we'd help. Ethan's not the only one you've helped over the years." Another man stepped forward, his voice gruff but sincere. "You've been hauling hay for my dad since his back went out. We ain't forgot." Lila stepped out from behind her porch light, her face a mask of stunned disbelief. Susan turned toward her, her tone firm but kind. "Yes, Lila, because Tom helps people. That's what good neighbors do." Lila's jaw fell open, and for once, she had no words, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Tom looked at the crowd, at the tools, at the people standing up for him, for Ethan, for what was right, and he realized something big. This wasn't just about a barn. This was about community, about standing together against those who sought to divide. But the moment of unity was shattered as a truck pulled up fast, too fast, its tires kicking up a cloud of dust. Sheriff Daniels climbed out, his face tight, his strides purposeful as he marched straight toward Tom. "We got a problem," he said, his voice low and urgent. Tom's heart sank, a cold dread settling in his chest. "What kind of problem?" Daniels looked him dead in the eye, his words a gut punch. "Ethan's gone missing." The revelation hit Tom like a kick to the gut, the air rushing out of him. "What do you mean, gone?" "He was in state custody. They took him." Daniels nodded grimly. "He was, but he never made it to the center in Preston. That's where Agent Klein was supposed to bring him, but he never checked in." A silence fell over the small group of neighbors, the weight of the words sinking in. "What are you saying?" Tom asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "I'm saying the agent who picked him up wasn't with CPS," Daniels said. "We don't know who she was." The air seemed to vanish from the sky, replaced by a suffocating dread. Susan put a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Lila stepped forward, her face pale, her voice trembling. "That's ridiculous. I called her. I found her through the HOA legal forum. She had credentials." Daniel's gaze hardened. "Which she likely forged. We pulled records from the state. There is no Agent Nora Klein and no transfer order for Ethan Brooks." Tom's mind raced, the pieces falling into place with horrifying clarity. The woman who had taken Ethan, Samantha Brandt, not Nora Klein, was part of a child trafficking ring, using fake credentials to prey on vulnerable kids like Ethan. Neighbors gasped, their faces a mix of shock and outrage. Lila's voice shook as she protested. I didn't know. I thought I was helping." Tom's fury boiled over, his voice hard, cutting through her excuses like a blade. "You just handed a runaway kid to a stranger pretending to be the law. I don't care what you meant. You did this." Daniel stepped in, his voice steady but urgent. "We're tracking the vehicle. It had plates. We've put out alerts across the state. But this is serious, Tom. Whoever took Ethan, they planned it." He paused, his eyes narrowing. According to security cam footage near the edge of the ranch, the SUV showed up 2 days before Klein came onto your land. They were watching. Tom's jaw clenched, rage like fire rising in his chest. "Watching and waiting," he said, the words bitter on his tongue. Lila's face was pale, her confidence crumbling like dry paper. "But why would someone do that? He's just a kid." Tom turned to her, his voice low and searing. "Because some people see kids like Ethan as disposable. He's got no family, no records worth digging into, no one that would miss him." Paul stepped beside Tom, his voice firm. "But you would." Susan nodded, her eyes fierce. "We all would." Lila looked around, her world unraveling, her hands trembling as she realized the depth of her mistake. I didn't mean." Tom cut her off, his voice a roar. "You never mean it, Lila. But that's the thing. You never think past your own front yard. You don't see people, you see problems." Daniels turned to Tom, his expression urgent. "What do you need from me?" Tom's mind snapped into focus, a memory surfacing. Nights spent with Ethan in the canyon, teaching him to spot deer trails, watching the stars. "The canyon," he said without hesitation. If Ethan got away, he'd go there. 20 minutes later, Tom was tearing across the back fields on his ATV, Shadow riding in the bed, the dog's ears flapping in the wind. Daniel's cruiser followed, headlights bouncing with every dip in the terrain. The canyon lay a few miles east, an old dry riverbed with jagged cliffs and a hunting shack Tom hadn't used in years. Shadow barked suddenly, a sharp, urgent sound that made Tom hit the brakes, the ATV sliding through a patch of dry dirt. He shined his flashlight toward the edge of the canyon, his heart pounding. There, at the bottom of a steep slope, were drag marks in the dirt and Ethan's backpack, its straps caught on a jagged rock. "Ethan!" Tom yelled, already halfway down the hill, his boots slipping on the loose shale. Shadow leapt ahead, scrambling across the rocks, his barks echoing through the canyon. There was no answer at first, then a weak, dry cough, followed by a voice, faint but unmistakable. Tom ran faster, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, until he found Ethan wedged beneath a fallen tree limb. The boy's arm was cut badly, blood staining his sleeve, and his leg was twisted at a wrong angle, his face scratched and pale. But his eyes were sharp, alive, filled with a fierce determination to survive. "Don't you ever do that again," Tom said, crouching beside him, his voice thick with relief and fear. He pulled off his jacket, wrapping it around Ethan's shoulders, the fabric warm against the boy's shivering frame. Shadow licked Ethan's face, whining softly, and Ethan managed a crooked smile, his voice weak but steady. "Didn't think anyone come. You got more people looking for you than you know," Tom said, his hand resting on Ethan's shoulder, grounding him. "How'd you get away?" Ethan grimaced, his breath hitching. "She got a phone call, turned around for a second. I opened the door and jumped. Rolled down a hill, been hiding ever since." Tom's chest swelled with pride. "Smart," he said. "You did good." Ethan's eyes started to close, exhaustion overtaking him, but Tom's voice pulled him back. "You matter to me, Ethan. You hear me? You matter." Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, spilling over as he nodded, the words sinking in, a lifeline in the darkness. 2 days later, the courtroom in Burnt Valley County was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. Reporters scribbled notes, neighbors whispered among themselves, and HOA board members sat stiffly, their faces a mix of defiance and unease. Lila walked in, her navy blue pantsuit pristine, her massive binder tucked under her arm, flanked by 2 polished attorneys who looked like they'd never set foot on a ranch. Across the aisle, Tom stood in jeans, boots, and a clean white shirt, nothing fancy, just Tom. Ethan sat behind him, his legs still in a brace but healing, his eyes bright with hope. Sheriff Daniels sat beside him, while Shadow waited outside, tied to a tree, howling anytime Lila so much as glanced toward the building. The judge entered, her presence commanding silence. Case number 2113, the bailiff read. Lila Harper and the Willow Creek HOA versus Tom Grayson, owner of Willow Creek Ranch. Lila stood, all smiles, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Your Honor, we're here not to stir conflict, but to preserve community standards. The defendant's property, while technically bordering our neighborhood, has directly impacted our quality of life. Noise, animal waste runoff, safety issues. We petitioned the court to restrict his livestock from occupying land within 200 feet of our residential lots." The judge raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Grayson, your response?" Tom stood, calm and solid as a tree, his voice steady. "Your Honor, my ranch has been here since 1912. Our land is properly zoned for agriculture. Our fences are legal, our animals contained, and every inch of what we do is by the book. This isn't about cows. This is about a woman who lost a fight she started and is now trying to win a war that doesn't exist." Lila's lawyers objected to the personal attack, but Tom didn't flinch. "Continue," the judge said, her tone neutral but her eyes curious. Tom held up a USB drive, its plastic casing glinting in the courtroom light. "This contains footage of Miss Harper trespassing on my land at night, dumping chemicals near my fence line, and collaborating with a known criminal who abducted a child from my property." Lila's jaw dropped, gasps rippling through the courtroom. "That video is under state review," her lawyer stammered, but Tom turned to the judge, his voice unwavering. "The sheriff has confirmed the identity of the suspect. This woman handed a child over to her without verifying credentials because she cared more about appearance than the boy's safety." Ethan looked down at the floor, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, the weight of the memory pressing down on him. The judge looked at him gently, her expression softening. "I also have statements," Tom said, pulling papers from a folder, from 6 neighbors confirming she manipulated the HOA into changing zoning interpretations without informing non-member residents like myself. The judge tapped her pen, her gaze shifting to Lila. "Miss Harper, did you attempt to use legal zoning codes to push your neighbor's livestock operations out of range?" Lila stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly. I did what I thought was best for our neighborhood," she said, her voice faltering. "And did you verify the credentials of the woman you brought to remove a minor from the premises?" the judge asked. Lila hesitated, her eyes darting to her lawyers. She had ID, she looked official. Did you check with CPS first? The judge's tone was sharp now, unyielding. Lila paused, then whispered, "No, enough," the judge said, her voice final. "This court will recess for deliberation." She stood and left, leaving Lila to sit down slowly, blinking fast as if realizing for the first time how deep she'd sunk. The ruling came 2 hours later, the courtroom falling silent as the judge returned. In reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court finds the following. The Willow Creek Ranch is in full compliance with county zoning laws. The petition to restrict livestock activity is hereby denied. Furthermore, due to the unverified facilitation of an illegal custody transfer, this court is referring Ms. Harper and the Willow Creek HOA board to the state attorney for investigation into potential endangerment and abuse of authority. Lila's mouth fell open, her lawyers frozen in their seats. The judge turned to Tom, her voice softening. "Mr. Grayson, your property and your character remain intact. Let me say personally, thank you for what you did for that boy." The gavel slammed once, and the room erupted. Paul slapped Tom on the back. Susan wiped away tears, and Shadow barked from outside, as if he knew. Ethan stood on his good leg, his eyes glassy with emotion. "You did it," he whispered. Tom turned to him, a small smile breaking through his stoic facade. "We did." Lila stood frozen as people walked past her, cameras flashing, her reputation crumbling like a house of cards. And maybe, just maybe, she realized what it felt like to be powerless. Tom strummed his guitar on the porch, Ethan beside him, bruised but whole. The judge's ruling echoed in their minds. Ethan might stay, a real placement, a real home. The stars shone brightly above, casting a soft glow over the ranch, the cows settling down in the fields, their gentle lowing a soothing lullaby. "You ever think she'll come back?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet, his eyes tracing the constellations. Tom smiled, the lines on his face softening in the moonlight. "Maybe, but we'll be ready. Fear doesn't live where kindness builds the walls." The words hung in the air, a testament to the strength they'd found in each other, in the community that had rallied around them. This wasn't just about a ranch or a boy. It was about hope, forgiveness, courage, and resilience. Tom's journey mirrors ours. Every act of kindness can rewrite a life. Every stand for justice can topple tyranny. Pause here, reflect on this story. Have you ever stood up for someone like Tom did for Ethan? Share your experience in the comments below. Your voice matters, and it could inspire others facing their own Lila, their own battles. But time is fleeting. Don't let this story fade. Subscribe now to Daily Narrated Stories. We're on the cusp of 1,000 subscribers, and your click unlocks more life-changing tales like Tom and Ethan's. Share this with friends, comment your thoughts, and join us in building a community of hope. Act today, because every story we tell, every life we touch, could be the one that changes everything. The warm glow of the porch light bathed them, the first notes of their song rising, a melody of new beginnings. Daily Narrated Stories brings you these uplifting narratives, inspiring resilience and connection, one tale at a time.